Levi's day was ruined, and he hadn't even finished breakfast yet. During the meal, Commander Erwin announced an upcoming military ball to celebrate the Trost victory. All of you will be expected to dance. The commander had informed them. If you don't know how, I suggest you find one of your fellow soldiers and have them teach you. Levi rolled his eyes. Damn it, Erwin, out of all things. Why the long face, Levi? Hans chuckled next to him. Does humanity's strongest not know how to dance? It's not like I ever had a reason to. Levi snapped in response. Hey, Hans chimed. You should ask FN to teach you. They're the best dancer in the whole regiment, if not the entire military. Levi averted his gaze, fighting the warmth that had risen to his cheeks at the mention of FN. They had been his close friend for years. Somewhere in that time, and despite his best efforts, Levi had fallen for them. Hard. Hans had figured it out, and she took every opportunity to push them together. I'm not asking them, Levi grumbled. Hans ignored him. Oh, look, there they are now. Hey, FN! Levi tried to clap a hand over Hans's big mouth, but it was too late. FN paused by their table on the way out of the mess hall. What's up, Hans? They asked. Levi's never danced before. Would you teach him how? FN turned their gaze to Levi. He hesitantly met their breathtaking eye-colored eyes, unsure of what would be worse, if they said no or if they said yes. FN smiled at him, and his heart dropped into his stomach. Of course. Meet me in the ballroom tonight after dinner, okay? Unable to voice a response, Levi merely nodded, keeping his expression neutral. Once FN was gone, he whirled on Hans. What the hell, Four Eyes? Hans held up her hands defensively. Easy there, shorty. I'm doing you a favor. This is your chance to get up close and personal with FN. Hans' voice took on a dreamy tone. Just think, you'll get to put your arms around them and they'll be holding on to you. Levi growled in warning. Hans laughed and scurried away before he could decide to hit her with a chair. Okay, there are 3 days left until the ball. FN told him that evening. We should have plenty of time to get you ready. They stood alone in the giant ballroom at the Scouts' headquarters. No one ever actually used it for anything, so Levi had never been in here before. It was quite grand, with mirrors lining on one wall and tall windows lining the other. Basically, all of the dances will be Vietnamese waltz. FN continued, so that's what we'll focus on. Now, before we start, are you okay with me touching you? The question caught Levi completely off guard. What? He sputtered, fighting to keep his composure. When we dance, FN clarified. I'll also need to adjust your frame so you know how it should feel. I know it's kind of obvious that we would touch in this situation, but I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with it. Oh. Levi mumbled. His stomach suddenly felt strange, as if there were butterflies flying around inside it. He quickly shoved the sensation away. FN was just teaching him how to dance, and that was it. He shouldn't be getting flustered over something like that. Yeah, whatever, I don't care. Great, let's get started. FN began by teaching him the basic steps. This was fine, as she walked beside him instead of actually touching him. Then she started adjusting the way he carried himself, his, quote, frame, unquote, as she called it. And Levi couldn't stop his heart from pounding faster inside his chest. Every time they touched him, his arms, his shoulders, his neck, their delicate fingers left his skin tingling in their wake. Then FN started to dance with him, and that was when things became a real mess. Although Levi had been fine on his own, he was suddenly forgetting the steps, tripping over his own feet and stepping on theirs. But he couldn't help it. Effin was so close. The way they arched their back, their neck, it was driving him insane. "It's all right, Levi," Effin assured him kindly after he had tripped for the 5th time and subsequently cursed himself. Viennese waltz is difficult, especially if you haven't learned any other dances before. Trust me, with a little more practice, you'll get it. Levi nodded, grateful that they were at least being patient with him. Then they took hold of him again, and the butterflies in his stomach resumed their flight. "You look nervous," they murmured. Levi felt his cheeks warm. He tried to school his face back into neutrality, but it was no use. Effin laughed under their breath. "Don't worry, it's just you and me, Levi." Levi knew they were trying to reassure him, and maybe it would have helped if it weren't for the fact that they were the one making him nervous in the first place. The next evening, Levi again joined Effin in the ballroom. "When I taught you the basics, we were just using what's called an open frame. However, now that you've got the steps down, we need to get you into closed frame. That means we'll have to get a lot closer." A string of curses flew through Levi's mind, as if last night wasn't bad enough. "Like this," Effin murmured before gently pulling his body against theirs. Every thought flew from his mind as his senses narrowed in on them. Now it wasn't just their arms that were touching, their stomachs, their hips, their legs. They were all pressing into each other. From the waist down, it looked as if he and Effin were one person. "Is this all right?" Effin asked, noticing how he had stiffened. "Fine," Levi sputtered, his voice barely a whisper. "Great, this will help us move quicker, which is good because Vietnamese waltz can get very fast." Effin released him for a moment to turn on the music. Levi loosed a breath. He didn't know he had been holding. "Stop acting like a schoolboy," he chided himself. "It's just a stupid dance." But then Effin was there. Their lithe body pressed up against him, and his heart was suddenly hammering inside his chest. At this rate, he would die of a heart attack before he even got to the ball, which might be a mercy, come to think of it. On their last night of lessons, Effin stopped the music and invited him to sit next to them while they both caught their breath. "Well, you've learned everything, and you're really good, but that comes as no surprise," they said with a wry grin. "Thanks," Levi mumbled, embarrassed at the compliment. It had taken some time, but he could finally dance with Effin without getting nervous enough to make a fool out of himself. "Do you feel ready for the ball tomorrow?" "Crap, the ball." Levi averted his gaze. "Not really," he muttered. Effin's brows furrowed. "Why not? Like I said, you're really good, Levi." "It's not that." He stopped, unsure if he should tell them. He was so used to keeping his feelings private. Yet Effin always managed to put him at ease, despite the giddy feelings he got whenever they were around. He could trust them, he knew. So he opened his mouth and said, "I think it would be uncomfortable, dancing with other people, being that close to them." "Oh," Effin muttered apologetically. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize. I mean, I didn't intend to make you uncomfortable when we danced." "No," Levi interrupted. "I wasn't." He sighed and tried again. "I'm comfortable with you, Effin. I wouldn't have danced with you for 3 days if I wasn't, but I don't think I could be comfortable with anyone else." Effin stared at him for a moment, their expression unreadable. "Well, what if we stayed together the whole night, just you and me?" they offered softly. Levi's eyes widened. "Is that allowed?" "Well," they said slowly, "technically it's allowed. It isn't usually done, though. But who cares? You shouldn't have to do anything that makes you uncomfortable, Levi." They held his gaze, sincerity shining in their eye-colored eyes. For a split second, Levi dared to hope. Then another thought crossed his mind, and he tensed. And you wouldn't mind being shackled to me all night? Effin looked surprised at his question. Not at all, they replied. I wouldn't call it being shackled to you, Levi. You really are a great partner, and I think it would be fun. They finished quietly. Levi's heart leaped involuntarily. Unsure of what else to say, he mumbled, All right then. Effin smiled, and his heart leapt again. I can't wait. Levi helped Effin out of the carriage they had shared with Hunj and Erwin, as he offered his arm and escorted them into the palace. He couldn't stop himself from stealing glances at them. So beautiful, he thought. No matter how many times he looked at them that night, they still managed to take his breath away. He led Effin into the palace ballroom. They had to stop for a moment until they were announced. So he took the opportunity to observe the space. Although the scouts' ballroom had been enormous in his eyes, this one made it seem small by comparison. It was opulently decorated, perhaps a little too opulently, but the royals did like to show off their wealth. Captain Effin, Ellen, escorted by Captain Levi. Levi led Effin to the dance floor, as the herald continued to call names behind them. There was a slight break between songs, which he and Effin used to find an open spot amidst the sea of dancers. As they walked, several soldiers turned to look at them. Levi caught snippets of their whispered conversations. Is that Captain Levi? Humanity's strongest soldier? I've never seen him dance before. He's shorter than them. What an odd pair. Normally, Levi wouldn't have cared about anyone else's opinion. However, as he took Effin in his arms, he realized that if he screwed this up, he wouldn't just be embarrassing himself. He'd drag Effin down with him. They must have noticed his unease, because right before the music started, Effin leaned down to whisper in his ear, It's just you and me, Levi. Almost on instinct, his body relaxed at their soft voice. He loosed a breath and let himself focus on them, on how they felt all at once strong and delicate in his arms. He took in the arch of their neck, the eye color of their eyes, and before he knew it, it was just him and them. No one else existed. The music began, and their bodies moved with it. In the back of his mind, Levi was surprised to find that he never faltered, not once. However, he couldn't bring himself to care. All he cared about was Effin in his arms, Effin who was so damn gorgeous that he couldn't stand it. At first, they kept up the proper frame, arching their neck away from him and looking to the wall. However, the longer they danced, the more they turned to look at him, until they had thrown their bearing away completely. They stared straight into each other's eyes, and they danced and danced and danced. It was exhausting, but neither of them seemed to notice. They also didn't notice when the hours passed, and over half the soldiers had left. They just kept dancing and dancing, lost in their trance, until the last song was called, and there was nothing left to dance to. They walked outside with the rest of the soldiers, who had remained until the end of the ball. As they stopped onto the steps to await a carriage, Levi realized that he was still holding Effin's hand, but they didn't seem to mind, and he didn't want to let them go. Then he heard more hushed conversations from the soldier around them. They only danced with each other the whole night. How rude. Don't they know they're supposed to switch partners? I would have at least thought Captain Ellen knew proper decorum. Do you think they're, together? Levi dropped Effin's hand. Of course, being as accomplished as they were, they must have known how it would look to stay with him all night. They must have known that people would think think them rude, but they had taken the hit anyway, for him. Effin immediately grabbed his hand back. Shocked, Levi glanced at them. They stared at the ground, seeming like they were also listening to the conversations around them. Their brow furrowed with an emotion Levi did not recognize. Then they turned to him, smiling as if nothing was amiss. "Do you want to walk around a little bit? This line is pretty long. We can catch a carriage outside the city." "Sure," Levi muttered, puzzled at their behavior, but glad to get away from the crowd. They set off down the empty lamp-lit streets. The night air was a little chilly, but Levi didn't mind. It was a nice change from the warmth of the ballroom, especially after he had been dancing for hours. However, with their fib color outfit leaving their arms bare, Effin seemed to be shivering slightly. "Here," Levi said, removing his jacket and offering it to them. They took it. They looked at him questioningly. "Won't you get cold?" Levi rolled his eyes. "Please, all these layers are stuffy. I could stand to lose one or two." Effin smiled softly, and Levi took that as his cue to drape the jacket over their shoulders. "Thank you," they murmured, clutching it around them. "You're welcome." And Levi averted his gaze. "I'm sorry." Effin stopped walking. "What on earth are you sorry for, Levi?" Levi stopped as well, but he still could not look at her. "All those people thought badly of you because of me," he muttered. "If I had just sucked it up and Levi, stop. Levi, stop." Effin interrupted gently, but not weakly. As they spoke, they stepped toward him and took both of his hands in theirs. Levi was so surprised by their actions that he looked up. "I don't care what anyone else thinks of me," they said resolutely, holding his gaze. "Stupid? Screw their stupid rules. They're completely arbitrary. I wanted to dance with you, and only you, so that's what I did." Levi could only stare at her. His mind honed in on that one phrase, replayed it over and over. "I wanted to dance with you, and only you." "Why?" He breathed, his voice barely audible. Effin's cheeks turned a light shade of pink. Then, before Levi knew what was happening, they had closed the gap and kissed him. He froze, completely paralyzed by the sensation of their lips touching his. Does this mean that they feel the same way he did? He wanted to return the gesture, but he didn't know anything about kissing someone. What if he got it wrong? Effin began to pull back when they sensed he wasn't responding. As soon as their lips left his, pure instinct took over. All Levi knew was that he didn't want them to stop. Not yet. So he grabbed the back of their head and pulled them down to him, pressing his lips to theirs. After taking a second to get over their shock, Effin responded. The sensation Levi had felt while they danced was nothing next to what he felt as their lips molded to his. His heart was ready to burst through his chest, and there were so many butterflies in his stomach that he thought he might be sick. But he didn't want it to stop. He didn't want them to stop. When they pulled apart for air, Levi immediately averted his gaze. He could feel his cheeks flush with embarrassment. I'm sorry." He stuttered, internally cursing himself for being such a mess. I don't know how." "How what?" Effin asked breathlessly. "How to kiss?" Levi nodded. Gently, Effin tilted his chin up so he would look at them. They were smiling softly at him, that same soft smile that always took his breath away. "Want me to teach you?" they whispered. Levi's eyes widened. He swallowed down his nerves, then nodded his head ever so slightly. It was all he could manage, but it was enough. Effen's smile grew as they leaned in. Their touch was so light, yet it sparkled electricity under his skin. So did her hands as they slid around the back of his neck, holding him close as their fingers played with the ends of his hair. Taking a cue from her, he wrapped his arms around their waist, pulling their body against his. As he tried to keep up with Effen, he realized that kissing was like dancing in a way, feeling the other person, responding to their movements. Levi stopped overthinking it and let himself get lost in them, just as he had during their dance. And before he knew it, nothing else existed. All he cared about was Effen in his arms. Effen, who he loved so much that he couldn't stand it. Eventually, they had to break apart for air. They stood, panting softly, arms still wrapped around each other. Effen stammered quietly, a blush once again gracing their cheeks. After what happened at the ball, everyone already thinks we're a couple, so, do you want to, make it official? His heart stopped. Once he had been determined never to have a romantic relationship with anyone. But now, he couldn't imagine his life without Effen. So he resolved to do whatever it took to keep them alive, and to keep himself alive for them. Whatever it took for them to have a future together. Yes, he breathed before returning his lips to theirs. I'm yours, Effen, and you are mine. As they continued to kiss, Levi realized that Hanj actually had done him a favor. Not that he would ever tell her that,